So the Prime Minister is planning what they're calling a bonfire of EU laws, reportedly in a bid to show off the opportunities presented by Brexit and move on from Partygate.
Well, the initiative is going to focus on cutting EU regulation on policy on the environment, farming, transport, tax. Cabinet ministers are reportedly hoping that the changes will allow Britain then to outcompete European countries.
Well, details of the proposals will be revealed alongside the Brexit Freedoms Bill, first announced in the Queen's speech. That bill is intended to make it easier to repeal or amend existing EU law and should lead to the cutting of £1 billion worth of regulation.
The new push comes after polling from YouGov revealed the Prime Minister could lose his seat at the next general election, alongside other large-scale losses.
Well, let's talk to co-founder of JL Partners and former number 10 pollster James Johnson, who joins us now. Good to see you this morning. But let's just get this polling out of the way to begin with. The fact that there's clearly a momentum to get Boris Johnson out of his seat by the opposition parties, but we are 2 years away from a general election, most likely. Do you think these particular polls make any difference, or is it just the wrong time to be looking at those sort of figures?
So usually in the midterm of a government, you do get the government slipping behind in the polls, and over the last few years we've seen that happen, particularly in that 2010 to 2015 Parliament. We saw Ed Miliband mount up big leads over David Cameron in the polls, but obviously David Cameron went on to win the majority. However, I do think this is a bit different, and I think these polls do spell concern for the Conservatives. One reason is that, unlike David Cameron, Boris Johnson is behind Keir Starmer on who's viewed as the best Prime Minister by the public. And also you see that sort of views against Boris Johnson much more negative than they were on David Cameron at the time. And the other thing is that often parties bounce back from midterm woes by saying, here's our long-term plan. Here's why things were bad then, so that they pay off eventually when it comes to the next election. I'm not seeing, and I don't think voters are seeing, what that long-term plan is at the moment from the Conservatives.
It's almost like the Conservatives need a bit of momentum or that narrative, like get Brexit done. Boris Johnson doesn't quite have the same story to tell right now. Yeah,
and I think he's struggling because so much of the focus remains on Partygate. And I think Boris Johnson was very keen, number 10 were very keen to put that to bed last week. And I think initially on the day of the Sue Gray report, they thought maybe they had a chance of doing so. But we've seen these news stories, potential new parties, potential edits to the report coming out over the weekend. And it just shows the difficulty of getting past that. And I think that this pressure is going to mount and mount and mount. The more that MPs and government ministers go out on the airwaves, go out on shows like your own, and they find themselves having to defend this over and over again, that's more time they're not spending forwarding the interests of their constituents. That's more time they're not spending, backing bold policies and reforms. So I think this is going to, unfortunately for everybody, because a lot of voters are bored of Partygate as well, it's going to stick around.
I was going to say, how much of this is Westminster bubble? Because we do talk, if you work in this business like we do, that things that generate a lot of excitement within politics, within Westminster, doesn't get reflected in the rest of the country. And I have to say the vast majority of people who contact us say, let's just move on. Even if you think he's done something wrong, let's just move on.
So it had a massive cut-through in mid-January when it first came out, and people certainly were very interested in the story then. You're absolutely right. People now are saying, look, there's so much bigger issues, there's the cost of living, there's all these other things going on as well. However, that should not be read as good news for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives, because although people are keen to move on, the brand damage that Boris Johnson has taken on his trust, on his competence, on his ability to get things done, that is going to linger, I think, despite the Partygate moving out of the news. We saw that happen in February, March. Remember, after the invasion of Ukraine, Boris Johnson, publicly backed by many of his MPs, praised by the most popular man on earth in President Zelensky, and still public views of him did not shift deep down.
He's got the opportunity again to sort of wave the Brexit baton. It's front page of the IP and plans this bonfire of EU laws to appease rebel MPs. How much of a vote winner actually is this?
Well, as far as I can tell, it's not actually a new announcement. It's re-announcing what was already announced in the Queen's speech. Often, Remain newspapers, Remain commentators jump on that and so do Leave ones. But I think that, this is clearly number 10 trying to get ahead, trying to move on, trying to get onto positive stories. But like I say, people and the public, if they don't trust the person who's delivering those policies, then that really, you however individually popular they might be, that really dents their effect. It reminds me a bit of Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. The Labour policies on an individual level were actually quite popular, but when they knew that Corbyn was associated to it, then the popularity went right down. I think we're starting to see the same thing in the country as a whole happen with Boris Johnson too.
There was talk. Now, when the Prime Minister was sort of still in the sort of latter stages of COVID recovery, there was talk of him just not wanting to stand at the next election, that it might be time, that he was still, the whole long COVID thing and what have you. Is that still likely a possibility, or does he seem like he wants to keep on going?
I think that everything I hear from people is that Boris Johnson is not going anywhere voluntarily. And I think that line that was briefed by Number 10 to the press back in the spring, that it'd have to be dragged out of the building kicking and screaming, probably still applies. The big question is, of course, will Conservative MPs move? And there is this drip-drip approach of Conservative MPs putting their letters of no confidence into the chair of the 1922 committee, Graham Brady, and we could see that step up, particularly in these by-elections that are coming in the middle of June. If those are bad for the Conservatives, then I expect we may well eventually see a move on the Prime Minister.
OK. James Johnson, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.